Prior to joining NIU, she was an executive director for Downtown Development nonprofit, and she's been a resident of Geneva for 25 years and has been on several boards and commissions. To her right is Tom Pretz of St. Charles Plan Commission and Historic Preservation Commission. Tom and his wife are 33-year residents of St. Charles, currently live within a central historic district in an 1883 landmark home. And most recently, they partnered with a neighborhood couple to restore an 1898 Queen Anne home, which is located within the district and is now landmark. He's serving his 11th year on the Historic Preservation Commission and his 7th year on the City Planning Commission. It's a double duty. Doing that. On my left is Ben. We've met Ben already. Next to him, Tom LaLonde is a chairman of the Batavia Plan Commission and Batavia Zoning Board chairman. He's vice president, managing principal at Williams Architects. He's done some work with the local Tri-City Park districts and the Kane County Forest Preserve District. And he is a past member of the Batavia Historic Preservation Commission. I think one of the original members when the commission first was formed. Founding. And then on the far end to the left, Sean Gallagher, architect, his own firm in Geneva. He's run his own firm since 2004. He's also a former member of Geneva's Historic Preservation Commission. He specializes in historic home building, historic homes, and teaches undergrad and graduate courses at Judson College. So we have the group presented here basically comes from a viewpoint of either architectural background, planning background, and or serving as a volunteer on any number of our local community commissions. So they're in the mix of always having a chance to review, ask for changes to, pass, deny, approve any form of building and development projects that come before us. I think it would be fair to say amongst this group for sure that we all we value the historic fabric that is amongst, that we live amongst here all the time in the Tri-Cities. We're blessed with it. It's a great value and it's a great asset. And so as part of that, managing it, or the management of that asset is very important. And I think it's shown well, and I'm glad to hear that as Ben comes from outside and takes a look around, it looks like a pretty good job has been done up to this point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start with a question or two from this end to the panelists, and whomever would like to answer first, we can, I don't think it would be fists thrown, I'm not going to point, but we'll just get it started there, and at some point, if anybody wants to ask, interject along the way from the audience, by all means, please do. I'll repeat the question to make sure that it's heard by everybody, and we'll just kind of move from there. I think this will probably kind of move on its own. It might be kind of just an organic thing. It'll grow and it'll move, and we'll go from there. So the first question I wanted to pose to the panel is, knowing that we've got this valuable asset amongst us, that we've got the river, we've got the bike path, we've got these wonderful pedestrian spaces, we've got park settings, and we've got this beautiful, these historic environment that we live in within the architecture that we have. They're charged in some way, shape, or form with managing it. And I guess my question to you is the challenges that you face in carrying out your duties on these boards or these commissions. Speak to some of the challenges that you see on a regular basis when a project comes before you. I don't suppose many of them are always, if ever, perfect. They need to be amended in some way. The way you handhold or work with a petitioner to get towards a better project that is more appropriate for the site that it's being presented on. Anybody just want to start along that line? This is more of a programmatic thing.
I'll jump in. As an architect, one of the things that I think it's incumbent on us as designers is to manage expectations for our clients as well as with the jurisdictions that we're working with. I think there needs to be some realistic expectations of what the outcome of the property or the project would be. Recently, I've had the honor of doing several tax-frees through the state projects, and as the architect, you're actually serving three masters because you have the client, you have the HPC, in this case Geneva, and then also the state, right? So it becomes a challenge to manage all of those moving parts in some ways. But being realistic in giving a client an understanding of what to expect, because it can be sometimes a cumbersome process. And so I do think that it has to be laid out with a reasonable time frame, these sorts of things, and then also being communicative with all three stakeholders, right? And having conversations with all three openly, trying to come to a resolution of issues. So from my end, that's one of the things that I see.
I'd like to add to that I think that our plans, whether they're comprehensive plans or downtown plans or specific area plans, it's important to take them seriously, and for those to be kind of the entree that a developer, particularly coming from out of town, can get a feel for what it is that a community is after, and then it is important for us to then reference back to that plan and to take changes to it under very careful consideration. That those plans have a purpose to lay out the philosophy of the community and to provide that information for everyone who's involved, whether it's city staff or whether it's a commission or a council member or whether it's a member of the public who has some thoughts on a particular project as it comes forward. I think they have an important role to play.
And I would just add that being able to balance all the varying interests that go into a project and understanding it from our community's perspective, that we're always looking at it from these plans, that it's a long-term solution for our community. You know, largely when we have developments coming into especially the core of our downtown, you know, the economics is always one of the kind of critical components. Obviously, from a developer's perspective, you need the project to be viable from an economic perspective. And how do you balance that against what is best for your community? And I see that as a challenge. I see, quite frankly, that there's maybe a little disconnect between what our Historic Preservation Commission is doing, we're doing in planning and zoning, and what happens at City Council, because we all have varying kind of specific areas of interest and focus of what we're tasked to do. But then once we walk out of the room, it goes to a different level and things can change. So there probably needs, and we had a little discussion last night about this, a little more communication amongst the three groups, at least in Batavia, to make sure that we're all at least understanding what each of these different entities excuse me, is focused on, and how can we find the common ground that makes it best for the community as a whole.
Well, from my perspective, I see as a barrier and a challenge the moment before plans and that are coming before the different commissions. And
can we just get your mic on, please?
Yeah.
I don't think it's on.
It's on, it's not. He needs it closer to his.
Closer to you, closer.
testing.
Good, yes.
Now I'll dig a hole for myself because you know what I'm saying. But what I was trying to say is that even a step before seeing plans and taking a look at long-term effects of developing and the petitions that come forth is really the perception of the authority and the power and a lack of knowledge as it pertains to the municipal rules and as far as zoning and codes and how that applies to all properties and the petitioners. And I think that if, because at the end of the day, no matter what the interest is and what the desire is for a particular property, that all petitioners and all properties fall based on zoning, certain types of codes. It isn't a commission and it isn't an individual on a commission itself that dictates this power. And I think typically, even to the developer level, that lack of understanding of what the codes are and the rules is a tremendous barrier. Once you peel that back, and if you're talking about just from the preservation footprint, a historic district or an outlying landmark, that applying 10 simple standards from the federal basis as a way of helping a petitioner move from their concept in their mind to the finished product. The understanding that it is purely from a helpful standpoint to blend that into the community of whole from the individual desire is probably our biggest, I see as our biggest challenge, and that's from day one. People not wanting to come before a commission to have a concept review, which is an open forum for everybody, and it makes it very, very easy then to get the resident feedback, the neighbor feedback, as well as from a city commission standpoint and what the city's position is in applying the comprehensive plan, and then coming up with that final project, which then I believe can take the past, blend it with the current, and then now you have your future long range.
Is there a question in the back?
Yeah, thank you for the time. So I'm going to answer this question as a Batavia resident. I rehab 2 homes and a condo and a park. So I've handled the Gallagher condo, the Oak Park condo, and the American Forest River Batavia. So I rehab all the time. And the question is unique to Batavia. We have around, I want to say, 4,000 wood frame homes built prior to World War II here, in different varying levels of upkeep. And some of them, quite frankly, are at the end of their lifetime, to be honest. So how do we balance this required need for redevelopment and infill development with historical preservation needs?
Did you all hear that question well enough? Okay. Anybody want to? I'm the moderator. I
Seeing as I'm from Batavia, I'll be honest, I don't have a specific response for that. I would say that I have seen in our community specifically some really successful redevelopment of existing properties, and I personally find that very refreshing because I've seen what's happened in communities like Hinsdale, Downers, Naperville, where you have these rather quaint established neighborhoods of really a wonderful scale and a sense of place, replaced by these just what I call kind of typical homes that I say someone takes an air pump and just makes them bigger. And you're probably, 10, 15 feet from your neighbor's window. I think it ruins the neighborhoods. Now, the community selfishly is looking at that because, of course, they're bigger homes, they're higher priced, and there's bigger tax dollars that go associated with that. I think long term, though, it hurts a community. And so I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of peripheral, but I would just say from a housing perspective, we just need to be sensitive to what we have and try to work with it as best possible. And it doesn't mean that there can't be tear downs. We have had some tear downs and had, in my opinion, some successful newer homes placed on those properties. But it does need to be done with the sensitivity to the neighborhood and the community as a whole.
comment on that from Geneva's perspective. This is something that has come up in Geneva quite often, and some years ago we did do quite a bit of work on a tear-down infill ordinance that we spent a lot of time on. But it's an example of where developing an ordinance isn't really a very exciting task. It's long and it's tedious and it doesn't arouse the public interest, and you don't get the level of public input that you will when someone comes in with a specific project that they want to build in a specific lot, and oh my gosh, all of a sudden it isn't what we want next door. And how important it is that we find a way to make sure that the public gets involved on the front end when these ordinances are being developed, because as was mentioned here, the ordinances really are the key, and they really are difficult to work around once they're in place. And we need to give a lot of thought ahead of time so that when someone like you comes in and wants to do something, that it reflects what it is the community wants.
And from our community, a tear down is not necessarily a no with a replacement, but before we say yes to the request for the tear down, we do want to see what you're planning on replacing it with. That replacement needs to be the appropriate mass styling, doesn't have to mirror the exact neighborhood, but some type of blend where it blends into the neighborhood, because what is coming in needs to benefit the whole, and that's the whole neighborhood. And as an individual, you're part of that, and it's very necessary that if you're coming for a request within our groups, we like to see what your proposed project is and then see how that does blend in.
Another funny thing I wanted to add on to this is communication has been mentioned a couple times here, and so and this kind of goes to, this dovetails into what is the city's overall, how well do they advertise, communicate the help that's available for people that are interested in doing a development or doing an addition, what have you. It falls on staff to say that, because obviously staff has had some hand in this before these people have shown up at your commissions. And do you think that, over the years, I think this has probably changed over the years, do you think that the communication that has been provided and the guidance that has been provided to your petitioners before they received before they come to before you, is it prepared them well enough? Do you think that they are blindsided by your review process, your answers, or do you think that they're fairly well ready because staff has prepped them, or so that's one part of it. The other part of it would be is these large things that show up in the midst of our public conversation at times. People say, well, I never knew about that. Where did this come from? Well, it's been in process for 5 months, but I never knew about that. So communication is always at the crux of this stuff. And excuse me, I don't know if you could speak to the communications that either need to be amended or are good. What do you think?
I'll start off on that one, and it's only because in the last, I would say that our community has improved greatly on the communication to a petitioner. And that's occurred in the last year and a half, maybe a little bit longer, where now when a petitioner is requesting a project, they'll typically end at the end of the cycle, yes or no as far as the recommendations, and thank staff for how they have provided the communication and the guidance. And it is extremely important that from the staff, from the very first day that somebody comes in to express interest, that they understand what departments are involved, who they need to talk to, and then to prepare them on what the process is so that they understand the length of time, the deadlines, if they want to hit certain meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And if that isn't functioning in the proper direction, it causes a whole bunch of hurt during the meetings when people are blindsided. Within our community, we encourage a lot of conceptual plan discussion before any real work cost is by the particular interested party is spent, so that they get the feedback from the public, from the government side, and then they know what the expectations are going down, so that they can make whatever necessary adjustments that they need.
I think that it is somewhat incumbent, or it's part of the responsibility of a client that is interested in a project to take the time to do some legwork, visit with staff, and kind of be a tick in the hound, if you will, and just be consistently checking in, communicating with. Now, as the architect, having submitted several projects now through HPC in Geneva, and having also done work in Geneva or St. Charles and Batavia, I think the process has improved immensely. I do have to say, especially with Geneva, there is always an open conduit of discussion with Michael Lambert, and he's been extremely helpful in communicating to as great a level as a client wants to hear what the responsibilities are for hitting deadlines, making sure that all of the deliverables are there, and they are doing concept reviews. As a designer, when I was on HPC for the 11 years back from 2000 to 2011, typically we would get a set of drawings or a project that really wasn't concept review, it was typically actually final sets of construction drawings. So what that did was it actually put us as a HPC in a little bit of a hot seat if the project had some issues, because then you had to say, gee, there are some changes that need to be made, and you've got a final set of construction drawings. So I do think that the concept review is a great idea. You as architects, if any of you are out there, be sure you have that in your numbers for your proposals. But anyway, that's just a little pro practice thing. I do think, though, that from a process end, one place that it does sort of maybe unravel a little bit is communication between different departments, specifically as it relates to, say, engineering and the building department. There are occasions where a project may need some engineering that you didn't know about, and then you have to make your client aware of, and that may be more the responsibility of the architect to communicate that with the municipality. And one little thing that has just recently come up with Geneva is a slight adjustment in how they're going to calculate lot coverage, which is just new and just dawning on them, and there's going to be some communication that's going to have to come out pretty rapidly as a means of understanding that, because that could actually shape or influence some design work that has to happen in the historic district, especially because lot coverage is a big issue on these tiny parcels. Right? I have a project right now on a 4,000 square foot lot, and the house on that lot is 1,200 square feet plus a detached garage, so much of that site is occupied by a building. So, but anyway, these are kind of deep in the weeds conversations, but being, again, open to communication and then reaching out to staff and then having a good relationship with staff, knowing that their job is hard. Okay, I have to say, their job is hard as they try to manage your expectations as somebody coming in, wanting to do something, and also wanting to control a piece of property that is yours, right? There's this sort of intrinsic sense of, I own the property and I have my rights. And so, one last thing I just want to say is that we are all stewards of these things. We unfortunately can't take them with us, right? And we have to leave them better than when we got to them. So that's my little 2 cents on that piece.
One additional level that is often occurring at the same time that staff is meeting with the developer initially that can be enormously helpful is on occasion in Geneva we'll have someone come forward before the commission to present a project, and they've already met with neighborhood groups or other interested groups and they've perhaps already modified some of their design to reflect the desires of that group. And when that happens, even though the two groups are often still at odds on some issues, the character of the conversation is so different. They already know each other and they've met each other in a much less formal, less confrontational kind of setting, and they're respectful, and there is a more productive conversation in front of the commission, which is beneficial to the commission as well, to hear that kind of a conversation. And staff can be the link between that applicant and the interest groups within the community, as long as they're aware of who those interest groups are, and they can put them together ahead of time. I think it's an important step and very helpful.
Question in the back?
Yeah, this is for Ben specifically. We've torn down some schools here locally, which are of the oldest, most beautiful buildings in our community, for not necessarily good reasons, lack of will, whatever. What's the trend nationwide from your perspective on? I noticed when I was out in New England this summer that they've done a lot of redevelopment with old schools. We don't even have that conversation here, but I was wondering, nationwide, is that a conversation at all?
Yeah, well, specifically, we're working right now on turning an old school in southeastern Massachusetts into a new senior housing facility. The school happens to sit next to an existing senior community center, and so there was a developer who thought, well, gosh, why not turn that into apartments for the folks who are using that senior center? And like you say, I think, especially in New England, those schools are they're pretty easy buildings to repurpose because they're thick walls, big windows, easy floor plates to repurpose. So at least in New England, we're trying as hard as we can to save those and turn those into housing. And I've seen some that are retail specific too. Out on the West Coast, they have fewer. Like a lot of the schools that were built there that are historic were built in the 50s and 60s without as much sort of thick, heavy construction. So those are easier to tear down and sort of easier to justify tearing down. But I think in New England that's certainly a big opportunity for adaptive reuse.
It's kind of a vision thing, isn't it, right? I mean, whoever has the control of a property, what's their vision? And some have fairly narrow visions, and some have some really great, far-reaching things, and those are the things I think we all look at and say, thank goodness, you had that vision to take that challenge on. Yes, sir.
One of the things that I regularly see is the not in my backyard mentality, and so you run across it in all the towns in the Tri-City regularly. How do the towns kind of work with that? Because you hear a lot from old residents, or I shouldn't say old residents, long-term residents who say, it's always been this way, I like it this way, I don't want to see any changes, you're messing up our town. And then there are newer residents who say, but I would like to see this progress, I would like to see this change. So how do the different towns work that balancing act?
Did you all hear that? How do we handle the NIMBY aspect in the Tri-Cities?
I'll take issue with one thing that you said, is that I often find that it's the newer residents that are the most protective. They've just recently invested probably way more money in that home than those of us who bought homes here 25 years ago. And they very much want to make sure that what they bought into, the Geneva, Mystique, or Batavia, or St. Charles, the same kind of thing, is retained, so that those are often your most vocal opponents to any sort of change.
Yeah, I would just say, because I've been on both sides of the table as an architect and certainly as a commissioner, some things you're just never going to get past. Some people aren't going to be completely satisfied. But I do think it's part of the dialogue and the communication, understanding the benefits to the community as a whole, and then working with the neighborhood groups, the surrounding community, so that they have an understanding, and just giving them a voice, an opportunity to be heard. What are their concerns? How can you mitigate those concerns? You may not solve them entirely, but I've seen it done very successfully, again, as an architect and as a planner. So from that perspective, I just think that there probably needs to be, more communication in relation to, what are the benefits related to the zoning, why that project is being able to be built where it is, and again, how does it serve the community as a whole.
I just have one last thought on that too, is hopefully there are some of you who are not, maybe less of an advocate for preservation and are here because you want to sort of hear about what the thinking is, because we may be preaching to the choir altogether and we're not hearing other voices from other sides. So
I just want to note that, Liz, I'm watching my time here. 5 more minutes. I'm going to go with some other questions and then
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Going back to a question that Sean mentioned, it kind of underlies this whole thing, more of a philosophical point. The conflict between the property owner, be it a developer who is looking for a good profit off of that property, or a homeowner who wants to build their dream home and feels that the property owner should have the right to do pretty much whatever they want to do with their own property, versus the community that says, no, we control what you can do. Thoughts on that?
Silence.
Just real quick, I think it's, this is not an easy answer, but it's showing the folks who are very sort of, me, this is mine, this is my own, showing them that their property, that value is heavily dependent on the community's value. So in what ways, if they wanted to do exactly what, they wanted to blow up their house to, twice what the houses in the neighborhood were, to suggest, well, okay, so what if everyone on your street does that? What happens to the quality of the neighborhood, and then suddenly your investment that you're so worried about is no longer as valuable because you are singularly also part of this larger whole. But it's a tough conversation to have.
Yes?
Ben spoke about, and I'm sorry I forgot the name of the code, that would allow to bypass certain probably safety codes that are now in present.
Yeah, the rehab
That
code,
could
yeah.
be, yeah, the rehab code, that could be prohibitively expensive and remodeling a building for an individual or even a developer. How do you weigh that with bypassing those safety issues?
Yeah, and it's funny, the code is really, it's sort of an opportunity for a conversation, so it is very case specific. And there are still, so 2 things, there are certain regulations that don't fall under the rehab code. So nursing home facilities, public schools, certain types of community housing, certainly anything in the healthcare field can't, you have to bring those up to code. But this is really, it's very case specific, and we have some very diligent fire inspectors who know the code and who can assess what's reasonable and what's not reasonable, and it's a conversation, so there's some push and pull. There were some things with that East Long Pond that we had to do that weren't maybe ideal from our perspective, but did make the fire code officials feel like, we can sign off on this and folks here will be safe.
And maybe it is not a conversation for this panel, but is a conversation more for our city staff and leadership to say, in what areas can our zoning and the boxes that we put around these processes to manage them, can they be broadened a little bit and softened on the edges so that certain things can happen site specifically, so that we can get to a product that otherwise would not be doable, but that we finally start to pick away at some of these things that just are problematic for somebody to get something out of a development. So, one last question, and then I will cede the floor.
And actually, just real quick, as a comment to this last one, it is absolutely a conversation in terms of between the council and a developer. We've had situations here in Batavia just within the last couple of weeks where we've had a couple of developers that they needed to rehab And because of what they're doing, ordinance kicked in saying that they had to bring in sprinkler systems, which is very expensive to do. And so we've worked with them to basically, so they have 5 years to put that sprinkler system in with the counsel of our fire chief. So he's happy. He knows that this is coming in and eventually brings up the code.
Right.
Yeah. And knowing, I guess from a developer's perspective, knowing that such conversations are possible and that the commission is open to hearing from them and being reasonable, getting that out is huge, because that's sort of a welcome sign for good developers.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to step aside. Thank you to the panel. Thanks for the audience participation. I hope this was enlightening and helpful to you all. Thank you.
One of the comments that I heard these people make yesterday when we did our prep was that they spend a lot of time at their commission, whether it's Plan Commission, whether it's HPC, something else, on an issue. They have a lot of firm consensus. Their audience that comes in is firmly behind them, and yet you get to City Council and stuff gets overturned, like the 6th Street School demolition. And that is, I just don't know how this is something maybe for us to think about with further discussion. This is not an easy thing to resolve. Tom talked about it in Batavia with regard to the proposed development up in the corner of Washington. So your commissions are all by recommendation to the city. Now that was not true in Providence. Ben told us about one commission where that rule basically set. But in our cases, they're going to council. So a couple things to finish. We're going to pass out evaluation forms. And our goal today was really not to have total agreement on consensus. More so was to see the complexity of issues, to get fresh perspective. So one thing that you could help us on the evaluation, is there a major concern that came out today in your mind or in your community that you could just jot down and we could consider it? Perhaps next year our session might be more focused. It might be on infill design and the whole process of it. It might be in affordable housing. I don't really know. But today it was more like just open up the floodgates and think about, think about the complexities, that nothing really is black and white here. I have...
Liz,
yes.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, sure.
I just wanted to say something that, in recognition for Stu Ainsworth and his willingness. We need individuals such as him who has a strong interest, is willing to support, and if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have this today. And also to Preservation Partners, who is a fantastic representative for a nonprofit with preservation in mind. So I would just like to thank
you.
Those.
Thank you so much. Seriously, Stu has been a great friend of ours, and because of him, we made this more than bare bones. We could get Ben out here. We could keep him in the community yesterday to look at things. We could get good refreshments from Cocoa Bean. We didn't have to go the Dunkin' Donuts route. So, I mean, we're semi-upscale here. I wanted to read, well, no, first of all, we have a little fun thing to do, and that is we have a door prize. Many of you have seen this book. The panelists got this book. It was very inspiring to us. Margaret Egan on our staff really is the person who recruited Ben to be here and who also has been pushing this book. And I read about 5 chapters. The chapters 2, 3, and 4 are superb. One of them very heavy on the economics of redevelopment. in the downtown, of vitality in the downtown, preservation, redevelopment, repurposing, and the economics are just there. And over, this gal is the head of the National Trust, so she's an authority. Another thing she talks about is very flexible zoning. You know, I don't think we really have much of that. Flexible on setbacks, flexible on some height, flexible on, one of you mentioned it, though it might have been Ben, form zoning rather than use zoning. So I highly recommend it. So Ben, if you would pull the winner. Now, I'm sorry, there were a few latecomers came in, and I didn't get their names because they hadn't signed up yesterday. But anyway, just as long as it's not staff here, okay? Or if it's not a panel who has the book. Oh my gosh. Mike Bruno. Okay. Yay. I'm so glad because Mike is not here. There was a very serious illness in the family. He texted me this morning. He is a council member running for office, and he takes stuff. So I bet you'll have this read by Monday. Don't you think so? Mayor Burns, don't you concur?
Whatever you say, yes.
Quiz him. Be prepared to quiz him on it. So Mike is one of our supporters. We all really need to support. We really all need to support each other. That's one of the things we're doing today. We're really trying to raise our voice so that it's a really loud voice. You know, polite and civil, but loud. Maybe we copy those women who marched recently. But anyway, yes, Lisa?
Real quick, Stephanie Meeks, who's the author of the book, you
yeah.
just had as your prize and your pitch. Just for those who don't know, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which holds a national conference every year in a different city, is in Chicago this fall for their national conference. We're the local presenting partner. I did put these fun little brochures on the table. There may not have been enough. Thank you. Good Vanna White showing on here.
Yeah, Vanna, thank you. Okay.
You know, there'll be more information forthcoming. It's, you know, it's here local. It's going to be a great opportunity.
It's going to be great. My staff already noticed that, and my staff is all behind this. I have a favorite architect who is not a critic, who is not alive anymore. I just love her name even. Ada Louise Huxtable. And she has said, many wise things. I want to finish with. What preservation is really all about, she noted almost 50 years ago, is the retention and active relationship of buildings of the past to the community's functioning presence. Good preservation doesn't embalm history. And some of us that are really rabid, we need to remember that. Good preservation doesn't embalm history. It binds a living past to change. So we're all, I think, in agreement, change and growth are important. We just want to help shape it. And my last comment, in this book, at the very end, the woman, Stephanie says, you know, there's one thing we all need to be passionate about in preservation. It should be maybe one of our #1 goals, and that is preserve our planet, planet Earth. Thank you for coming. Thank you.